thank you so much, Maria. I hope everyone can hear me. What a wonderful session. And with that, I'm taking over with a great pleasure to discuss the very last book presentation, the last speaker of today, Catherine Keane. Catherine, just to give a short introduction, Catherine did her BA in anthropology and classical archaeology at the University of Illinois, and which was followed then by an MA in Mediterranean archaeology from Edinburgh, with a thesis on temple to church conversions in Pamphylia. So she already kind of in her master's got into the subject of churches, which then she continued for her PhD in Germany at that time. So I think for each level she changed the country, which is always nice to kind of to change the academic environments. So she went to the Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich and wrote her PhD in the Department of Late Antique and Byzantine Art History with her advisors of Franz Altobauer and Albrecht Berger, with a title More Than a Church, the Archaeology of Late Antique Basilicas and Economic Production in Cyprus, which she defended in 2021. And after that, she remained in Germany with postdoc fellowships at various universities, like the University of Tübingen, University of Marburg, but also with a short stop to Istanbul at the Koç University and the Cyprus American Archaeological Research Institute. And today she will discuss her recent publication with a title, similar title with her PhD thesis. It's based on her PhD thesis, More Than a Church, Late Antique Ecclesiastical Complexes in Cyprus, for which was published last year by Brill, and which is now currently shortlisted for the European Association of Archaeologists Book Prize of 2025, and very rightful so, which it's an excellent book. I can really recommend that, because it's one of these, for me, rare cases where Catherine managed to investigate ecclesiastical infrastructures and different related facilities on Cyprus, but it's a case study basically for general development of church facilities beyond their role as spiritual and cultural centers. Because from the church, from its earliest centuries, or the beginning basically, was deeply involved in industrial and agricultural exploitation, and therefore a very important player in the development or in the economic landscape of the Mediterranean. But I mean, I don't want to say too much, because I think now it's time for Catherine to actually give us more information on it. Catherine, I think the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Alkiviadis, for the lovely introduction. I will share my screen so that I can show a PowerPoint. And
wonderful.
If I'm not audible or you can't see anything, just let me know. Hopefully that's full screen now.
Yes, at least I can see it's full screen. Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Great. So as Alkiviadis said, I'm going to present my book, More Than a Church, today, which was published last year after the PhD in 2021. It's a comprehensive study of the archaeological material of church complexes with productive workshops in Cyprus from the 4th to the 9th centuries. As a late antique archaeologist, I got into this topic by studying the introduction of Christianity into urban topographies and noticing the developing power of the church in sociocultural aspects of this daily life. On a material level, church complexes routinely contained installations for the production, storage, and trading of products, while institutionally, the church was influential in infrastructure planning and local economies. The topic of the church is influence in these early centuries is more studied in textual sources and in Western Europe, which Ian Wood has recently argued controlled perhaps a third of the total wealth in the post-Roman West. But the archaeological material of the church's role in production and trade is ubiquitous, but usually neglected and has not been synthesized or analyzed. So therefore, this book is an archaeological study so that we can get some data on the archaeology material to accompany all of what we know already from text. The particular focus is on the dynamics between economic spaces and sacred architecture, and it's organized by the type of product or industrial activity. I specifically investigated complexes where deliberate participation in production was visible in the first or second phases, and I was able to distinguish between those and churches which had been damaged or abandoned with later use. So we know that the church was economically active as a landowner and mercantile agent into the Middle Byzantine period, including aspects of land ownership or participation in pilgrimage or monastic contexts. But was it really just self-sustaining monasteries or clergy producing oil and bread for lighting and liturgical purposes? Or was the church as an institution behaving as an economic agent? Was it reactive or mercantile or opportunistic? I would like to begin by talking about the socioeconomic impact of the church that we know from texts. And on these two quotes, you can see where they sit, where there have been complaints of the church doling out grain, etc., and behaving as nothing more than a universal storehouse, or bishops vexing themselves for things that other people usually vex themselves for. And I would point anyone who is interested in the textual sources and the development of the church's power towards the texts on the bottom right, because they are way more comprehensive. So I wanted to show also generally how the material looks for an archaeological study, how we can tell what archaeological material there is for the church's agricultural and productive activity. Whether it's bread stamps on the top middle two pictures or an olive oil press weight that has Christian iconography like the bottom left, or pilgrimage material like abomina, ampullae, and the ceramic kilns that mass-produced them in the bottom middle two pictures, or a steel yard inscription found from the Asa'ada shipwreck that names a priest and captain, as well as general ubiquitous imagery like Christian symbols on ceramics on the bottom right. So these are the types of sources that I used in addition to the main focus of the book, which was architectural and archaeological. I compiled sources. I looked at material in storerooms, but mostly I looked at the building phases and the relationship between annexes and churches and things that are co-located with each other. So the questions of my book were, what was the role of the church in and its relationship with non-liturgical practices? And also, how can these non-liturgical practices be investigated? So the book is a synthesis of these products, ceramics, copper, flour and bread and olive oil, when they're co-located with or otherwise connected to late antique and Middle Byzantine churches up until the 10th century. But also a study of how we might be able to connect the church with the economy, where we know it was active, but it's not always so visible archaeologically or easy to trace. This is the table of contents of the book, and you can see the main chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7 focus on these main industries. I had a previous chapter in the dissertation that was published as an article about the role of churches at harbors and ports. But for the most part, this book is divided by product. And in each of these chapters, I focused on one main site or a few in olive oil. There are 3 sites in flour and ceramic kilns. Those are each one site that are reanalyzed with a new interpretation of how the church functioned or what its annexes were intended for. And then the copper chapter is created a little bit differently because it's more a study of these large areas where copper extraction is attested through the slag heaps, and then mostly later churches are situated amongst them. But when they were contemporary, the church and the copper extraction or the smelting, there are questions of supervision or control, which is less of an archaeological building phase discussion. So I'd like to run through the chapters visually to give an idea of what the archaeological material looks like in the book. And for this, I would like to thank Matilda Grimaldi, who was just mentioned as also providing illustrations for another book. So that was nice. She provided a lot of maps and floor plans. Olive oil tends to be is traced through these installations like crushing basins or press weights or press beds. And in Aya Varvara and Amathus, the case study, on the northwest side of the site, there is an olive oil pressing room here, which you can see on the left photo towards the foreground, which I think is one of the more interesting examples of a church and its production of olive oil that is more than self-sustaining. And when this excavation took place in the 70s, the interpretation was that it was monastic. But I think that the olive oil facilities here surpass what would be required for local sustenance, even if it was a monastery. So there was new building phases drawn up and a new analysis of the site as a whole because it underwent many phases and had other industrial components, including bread and flour. For the flour and bread chapter, as you can see on the right, there are stages of getting bread and flour out of cereals, such as threshing and grinding, and each of these have archaeological components as well, like threshing floors or grinding stones. And for this case study, I looked at the Episcopal Basilica in Amathus, which is visible on the bottom right of this map. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but it might have even had its own harbor facilities, which would be interesting to discover in the future. But this basilica underwent some damage in the 7th century, and after that, this table on the top right was installed in one of the rooms in the atrium. Also installed in these rooms was a flour mill and other tables and benches, and there were walls and doors, walls installed in the atrium and doors closed. And in a final phase of use, there was even a storage of grains in the narthex. So this is an example of a church where the church has continued to function in a liturgical way after damage and after some kind of production has been installed in its vicinity. And we know this also through a textual source for this basilica in particular, that baptisms continue to take place here. And the coins that we looked at in this site provide information that the table was in use into this time period. For the ceramic chapter, there's a difference between how a lime kiln looks and how a ceramic kiln looks, as you can see on the right. And there's a church here that has a large kiln on its northeast side. And for this chapter, I reanalyzed the phasing and also the kiln itself. And I think that while the archaeologist who excavated it wrote that it was a final phase lime kiln, I think it was actually a ceramics kiln from a very early phase. In fact, I think this kiln, which is visible on the left in a photo, but also on the north side of this church, I think this was either predating the church or contemporary with it. And then in a final phase, it may have been used as a lime kiln. And this whole northwest area is very interesting and was the bulk of the chapter. And I think in the end, the church aligned itself with the kiln that was already existing, or it used the ceramics at the same, it had some kind of relationship in which ceramics were produced while the church was in use in the liturgical way. I won't go into any details on the copper chapter because it's too wide-ranging, but I just wanted to give a visual of how slag heaps look, which is the waste product that comes when ore is smelted and worked to retrieve the metal from within. And it is this large, durable product that ended up in these hills all around the Troodos Mountains. And on the map where the red dots are sites that I looked at for this chapter. There were a lot of Middle Byzantine remains, and it's a very interesting discussion about supervision or holy landscapes in a later period. So the book ends with a chapter looking into the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries with a view into how the church may have acted in an economic way into these periods where we have less information. And then that bridges this kind of gap into the 10th and 11th centuries where things pick up again in Cyprus. I also have a gazetteer that is a catalog of all the sites that I discussed in the book with their floor plans, their coordinates, an overview of their economic material and bibliography information for each of them, so that it could be useful maybe for future students or anyone who needs information on the churches of Cyprus, even if they're not interested in the economic activity. So here again is the book cover with just a link to the book's the website of the book, but also a review that's already come out from Tassos Papakostas, which was very kind. And I would just like to say that that I think the contribution to scholarship is that it's a significant corpus of information on the topic of the church's economic activity from an archaeological perspective, and that in future excavations which notice these productive annexes next to churches, it might be more possible to contribute to our understanding of religious institutions as economic agents. And finally, I would just like to list some people and institutions that have facilitated this research and its publication. And with that, I would like to end, and I would welcome any questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Really very exciting. I mean, especially also for me, who is working on similar topics starting from the other end, from the maritime perspective. So it's really kind of gives huge insights. And I think I wish that there would have been more such comprehensive studies on the role of the church, different church infrastructures. But yeah, so if there should be any questions, please write them in the chat or the F&A. Actually, there is already one question by Theo Marinos. Does or did the division of Cyprus cause any problems in your work, in the research? How did you how did you cope with that?
Yeah, it's I tried to make it a synthesis of the whole island and not end at the buffer zone, but it is a tricky political situation to manage. I included everything that I could from the northern coast of Cyprus as well as the Karpass Peninsula, even though there hasn't been a lot published on it after 1974. And I did whatever I could as a tourist. So I used my own photos and my own interpretations, as well as, luckily, a lot of them were excavated before the 70s. And so I could use old material on that, as well as personal communication where people were telling me about sites they know but haven't been published or excavated or surveyed, which was helpful. Hopefully there's not too many personal communication footnotes in the book.
Wonderful, thank you. There is another comment, really interesting, Catherine, with apologies for going off. Is there much evidence for glassworking industry or just anyway around the churches?
Yeah, there's I included it on my copper map and I included like a few pages about it within the copper chapter because it wasn't enough to stand alone on its own topic. But there are a few sites where we know glassworking took place in the late antique period, and I think that two of them are near churches. One is a much later church, but I just heard about one actually. Another one by word of mouth a few weeks ago at a conference in Copenhagen at a glassworking conference. And this one, it's also not connected to a church, but it's in the forum of it's in the Agora of Amathus. And it was excavated also in the 70s and totally cleared. So I had no idea it existed, but that's the material of that was excavated by Pavlos Florenzos later, or he knows about it now, or he knew about it, and then he passed it on to someone else who works at the Cyprus Institute who is studying it in a scientific way. But there's a couple, and I could provide citations if you are interested.
Tassos Papakostas, a Cyprus expert, has also a question. Catherine, you note in the book that you did not include wine production mainly because of the lack of evidence. Is there any way of getting around this and assessing the potential role of the church in viticulture through the scanty evidence?
Yeah, thanks, Tassos, and also thank you for the book review. There are a couple of sites where there is a suggestion that it was functioning for wine. So I think in future research I could go back and visit those in person, but when I heard about them in the first place, it was so undated and so vague that and not excavated as well. But I was wondering about it because also in recent conference papers I've heard discussions of olive press facilities that may have been reused for wine later. So I would like to investigate that later, especially because Cyprus has so much wine. Um, but yeah, at the moment I didn't get enough of it, I think. Not even enough to include in the book. Anyway, thank you for the questions.
There's always so much more to do in the
Yeah.
future, and I guess you will kind of also take some further aspects into account in your future positions and work.
Yeah.
If
I would
there,
like to
I
hear them.
can't see any further questions, and since I think we are also already overdue time, I again thank you very much for the presentation, and also congratulations to your fantastic book.
Yeah.
It's a really great pleasure reading it, and it enriches our academic knowledge, not only of Cyprus, but in general for the Eastern Mediterranean
Yeah.
and the role of churches. And with that, I thank the audience for staying until the very end of today. And I think tomorrow the session starts at 1 o'clock with a presentation of Romain Gauchil, chaired by Benoit Cantet from Sorbonne University, about une symphonie de pouvoir judiciaire Byzance. So I invite everyone to continue tomorrow, and I wish you all pleasant afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Catherine.